Hey YouTube, I am here to go over chapter 2 of God Don't Like Ugly by Mary Monroe. We've already read chapter 1, where Mr. Boatwright is moving into Annette and her mom's home. And Annette is not too particularly fond of it. And at first she was wondering like if this is her grandpa, if this is an estranged relative, or who exactly he was. And then chapter 1 ended with Mama telling Mr. Boatwright that he basically had permission to go upside Annette's head if she did not do what he said to do when she wasn't around. So jumping right in for chapter 2, we'll read and discuss as we go. Oh, Jesus. All right. Other than Mama, I didn't have any other relatives in Richland, Ohio. According to her, my grandparents on both sides were dead. I had just a few distant relatives scattered throughout the South that I had never met. The only one Mama still communicated with was her older sister Bernice, who lived in Florida, near Miami, where we had come from. When both her parents died within weeks of one another, when she was 16, Mama married my daddy out of desperation. After miscarriages, she gave birth to me at 34. Mama and I looked alike, but she was called pretty and I was not. We had the same high cheekbones and heart shaped face with small nose, bow shaped lips, long lashes, so long and black they belonged on the dial, and beauty mark on the right side just above our lip. People called her beauty mark a mole. They called mine a wart. Not only was Mama light skinned, she was slim. Just being light was enough by black standards for her to be considered attractive. Being slim was icing on the cake. No matter how pretty I actually was, people made it clear I was too dark and too fat. My short, kinky hair was a crown of thorns. People with dark skin were usually looked down upon by light skinned black people. I was certainly no exception. When a light skinned, pretty little girl from our church died, I overheard one of the church ushers say, "Too bad it wasn't that gnome Annette." A knife in my heart couldn't hurt me more. Because of the things I had already experienced, I could remember back to when I was 3. Daddy was still around then. Like a lot of black folks in Florida, we didn't have much. We lived in the shacks, wore secondhand clothes, and moved often, so often that we always managed to stay a few steps ahead of our bill collectors and the Klan. We bought a lot of stuff on credit that we couldn't always pay for, like food, medicine, and every now and then a luxury item like a Christmas gift or something for one of our birthdays. Excuse me. Daddy was an outspoken man who stood up in the church and political rallies and cursed the way white folks were treating us. With God's help, we ain't going to put up with them Jim Crow the rest of our lives. He used to shout, standing on a podium, waving our shabby Bible. News about his arrogance always reached the Klan, and he received veiled threats too often for his comfort. That's the main reason we roamed around like gypsies. I remember a close call one night while we were attending a revival through somebody threw a firebomb in the window of our house. We got home just in time to grab the shopping bags and battered suitcases we kept our belongings in. That same night, we hid in the church members' barn until Daddy arranged for somebody to drive us to a safer part of town, where we stayed in another shack until we had to flee again. So at 3, Annette is remembering basically moving around a lot, staying ahead of bill collectors, staying away from the Klan because her dad was one who spoke at rallies and spoke out against the way Black folks were being treated at the time. Daddy was a migrant laborer and worked in the nearby fields 6 days a week. Mama cleaned and cooked for rich white folks in Miami 2 days a week. The year was 1954, and segregation was a way of life. I ain't about to sit in the back of nobody's bus, Mama often said. Mama didn't even bother trying to ride in cabs, so we usually walked or hitched a ride on somebody's mule wagon to her jobs or everywhere else we went. She would prepare us a few sandwiches, usually a potato or bologna, and we would leave the house early in the morning right after Daddy did. Those walks were long and hard, and though the Florida sand was soft, my feet developed calluses that remained with me for years. Those were some long walks, hard walks. I liked going to work with Mama. It made me feel grown up and important. Rather than stand all day waiting for Mama to finish her duties, I earned a few cents for myself doing odd jobs like walking and bathing a dog or babysitting some old person. My favorite responsibility was sitting on the front porch of a large red house with an elderly Italian woman. Her name was Rosa Piaz, and she was more than 100 years old. Her daddy had owned slaves, and her mind was so far gone she thought that I was one. Could you imagine? Go get me some goobers, Spooky. She used to tell me I'd sneak into the house for goobers and whatever else I could find to nibble on. My job was to fan her and empty her spittoon, little spit thing when you dip snuff and spit it out. She dipped a lot of snuff, so I was forever running around emptying spit. When nobody was looking, the old woman and I threw rocks at moving cars. When I made her mad, like the time I couldn't find any more rocks for us to throw, she threatened me. You lazy heifer, I ought to sell you to one of them cane jockeys, make a field hand out of you. When she made me mad, I waited until she went to sleep, then I pinched her flabby neck. I knew that the woman was senile, so I just hid my face and laughed every time she threatened to have me sold. A minute later, we'd be friends again, chasing some of the kids in the fancy white neighborhoods where Miss Rosa lived with switches. One time, Mama caught us. She grabbed my arm and shook me so hard that my whole body ached. Girl, Miss Rosa can do whatever she wants. She white, but you can't be messing with no white kids. Mom and Daddy had me believing we were so good as anybody else. So it confused me when I was scolded for sassing or upsetting somebody white. Every time I got comfortable in a particular situation, we moved and I had to start all over again. Our rootless existence was the only life I had ever known. I was used to it, but I didn't like it. It made me feel like I was different from other kids in a way, and I didn't understand. It made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere. My favorite time during that period was when we lived at the bottom of a hill off a dirt road in a rural section of Miami called Hanley. Our house had a living room, a kitchen, and one bedroom. I liked it because we were so close to the woods that squirrels and other creatures wandered into our backyard to eat out of my hand. This was a little girl who had a lot of friends that were wild animals. Because she moved so much, she didn't really make real friends like that. The furniture we had was a stove with no legs, an icebox that shook so much we kept it unplugged most of the time. We had a table in the kitchen, but just one chair. Mom and Daddy took turns sitting on the chair. There were two tree stumps at the table that we used in place of chairs. I always had to sit on the smaller one. In the living room, we had a couch with a floral design. It was clean and comfortable, but both arms were about to fall off. Things like coffee tables and lamps were not only luxury items but cumbersome. We left a place. When we left the place, it was usually in such a hurry. We only left with the things that we could carry. We slept on the bedroom floor in our clothes until the preacher gave us a stained mattress, a rib sheet, and a blanket that was so old and worn you could see right through it. We ate off cracked plates or out of cans most of the time and drank water from the spring a few yards from the house. We had one 40-watt light bulb that we carried from room to room and hung naked from an extension cord. When it died, Mama brought home a cold lamp she had found along the side of the road. God sure is good, she swooned, shaking that rusty cracked lamp in my face. One of these days, ooh, excuse me, on the days that Mama didn't work, she was busy sewing, cooking, and washing our clothes by hand with homemade soap. There were no kids my age close enough for me to play with, so I spent most of the time running around with squirrels. One with the white paw got so friendly with me, he was bold enough to climb up on our back porch and scratch the door. Mama would chase him away with the whisk broom. Daddy always petted the squirrel and yelled, Annette, you got company. Mama and all the other black women I knew made soup and stew out of most of the wild creatures that inhabited the woods, even snakes. When Mama suddenly started getting too friendly with my squirrel, petting it and feeding it, commenting on how plump he was, I got scared. The week before at a church dinner, one of the sisters brought a big bowl of some type of mysterious meat floating in a fiery red sauce. It was delicious. I had two helpings. Your girl sure is lapping up that squirrel soup, the sister commented. I ducked out of that church, ran behind a tree in the back, and vomited, praying that I had not eaten the squirrel I had become attached to. When I got home, it was too dark for me to look for my squirrel. But the very next morning, he came to the back door. Mom and Dad, sorry about that. On a bowl at the dinner table, I refused to eat any, afraid it might be my former pet. Daddy returned from the fields around the same time every evening, just before it got dark, no matter where we lived. Every evening, I would sit on the porch and wait for him like a spider. He brought home fruit for me and sometimes discarded toys, and he found along the way. My eyes would light up when I spotted him struggling to make it the rest of the way home from the main road. I would jump up from my spot and run and leap into his arms, almost knocking him down. Girl, can't you see how tired I am? He used to scold, all while helping me climb onto his back. Then he would carry me back to the house. The first thing he would do was check with Mama to see if it was time for us to move again. I was glad every time Mama said, Not yet, Frank. Not yet. We didn't have a radio or a television. There were too many luxuries we didn't allow ourselves to think about owning. That's why we didn't know about the tornado coming one Sunday after we had come home from church. The day had started out like any other summer day in Florida, hot, dusty, and humid. We got up, peeped out of the windows, and later that evening we walked 2 miles to the Baptist church across the main highway. It was during the sermon when the wind started whistling and it didn't seem as hot as before. Mama, it's going to rain, I whispered, sitting between her and Daddy on the wobbling bench near the back of the crowded little country church. Shh, was all she said. Then she went back to shouting, Amen, like everybody else. I just hoped that we'd get home before the rain started. We didn't have anything to protect us from it, and rain, unless you had naturally straight hair, was considered one of a black female's worst enemies. I hated when Mama had to straighten my hair with the hot comb, what little bit I had. After we arrived home from church, Mama started cooking, and I followed Daddy to the nearby lake where he fished for part of supper. The lake contained fish, crawdaddies, crabs, and things I couldn't even identify. Everything in the lake was free, and often it was all we had to eat. We just had to catch it. Don't you get close to that water, girl, Daddy advised. You know I ain't got the strength to jump in there after you. All right, Daddy, I smiled. By then, not only was the wind howling, it was darker than usual for early evening. I guess that's why I was not doing what I would usually did when I was by the lake, running up and down the bank, beating bushes with the stick and throwing rocks in the water. Instead, I sat down on the ground next to Daddy and placed my head against his chest. I liked being so close to him. I could feel the beat of his body generated, the heat his body generated, and I could even hear and feel his heart beating like a drum. When he was not looking, I stared at the side of his face. Compared to most of the other men I knew, he was good looking. He had big black slanted eyes, but there was sadness in them. I had the same eyes. There were noticeable lines on his face and around his mouth. His nose reminded me of noses I saw on some of the Indians in the area, big and hawk like, but still attractive. He had something about, he had said something about having Indian blood. One of Daddy's front teeth was missing. A white policeman had knocked it out with the billy club when Daddy sassed him. You hardly noticed the missing tooth when he talked or smiled because he had a thick mustache. He was tall and powerfully built and dark brown like me. I didn't know how old he was, but his hair was thin and starting to turn gray. The fish was not biting much, so Daddy and I left the lake after he had caught only two catfish. Mama cleaned them, fried them, and we feasted on fish, some pork, and yams and greens from the garden Mama had around the side of the house. It had started raining and the wind was stronger. Our little house was shaking and rattling so much our table wouldn't stay still. It's a good thing I didn't hang out them clothes like I had planned, Mama sighed, looking toward the window. Mama frowned at me and let out her breath. Annette, stop chewing so loud. She paused for a moment, then turned to Daddy. He seemed to be worried about something. He was eating real slow and staring at the wall. I just figured he was concerned about the storm. When it rained too much, he couldn't work in the fields. And when he didn't work, he didn't get paid. Less money meant less of everything, and we already on the poverty level. What's wrong with you, Mr. Goody? Mama said. Daddy's first name was Frank, but I heard her use it. Only heard her use it when she was mad at him or when she was serious. Daddy didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the wall. Maybe the cat got your tongue, I suggested. Not only did I get a cold, hard stare from both of them, but Mama shoved a pig foot into my mouth. That's what she usually did when they wanted to silence me. It was no wonder food became my drug of choice. Before Daddy could respond, Mama felt his forehead. You want a dose of cold liver oil or cod liver oil or something homebrew? She asked. Daddy just shook his head and said, no, I'm all right. We'll talk after the storm. He was talking to Mama, but looking at me. My first thought was Daddy was going to talk to Mama about another move. He pushed his plate away, then got up from the table and went to sit on the footstool in the living room and started looking out of the window. What's the matter with him? I wanted to know. Daddy was a strong man, not just physically, but he had a strong personality, unlike other black men I knew. Daddy didn't back down from no white folks. I used to see men bigger than him who was cowering nervously and keeping their eyes on the ground when talking to white folks. Daddy looked white folks straight in the eye when he talked to them. And when white folks called him uncle or boy, he corrected them and said firmly, my name is Mr. Goody. Hush up, Mama said to me, like an afterthought. She grabbed another pig foot and aimed it at my mouth. When she saw I was still gnawing on the first one, she pressed her lips together, shrugged, and put the pig foot back on the bowl on the table. The rain was really coming down by then. It was dark enough for Mama to light a lamp so she could sit in the living room and sew. She occupied the couch, and I sat on the floor next to Daddy on his footstool. Just minutes later, the tornado came roaring at us like a runaway train. And I am going to stop right there. We're going to be picking up where still at chapter 2, when the tornado hit the house. We're going to figure out what it is that is on Dad's mind. We're going to figure out how much damage this tornado does if it actually hits them. So be sure to like, comment, share it, give it a thumbs up or give it a thumbs down, whichever you prefer. It all matters to me because I want to know what you think. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time. And remember to get back with me for God Don't Like Ugly by Mary Monroe. This is the first of many books that we will be reading together. Thank you and have a beautiful, beautiful day.